Hi, I'm Jesse Gillis, the host of Now is the Time to Talk. Today I have a special guest, Will Hopkins. Will Hopkins I met about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. He was the executive director of New Hampshire Peace Action. He's a member of Veterans for Peace, New Hampshire chapter, for which I am also, and About Face, Veterans Against the War. Will, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. My name is Will Hopkins. I tend to start my story around the turn of the century. So in 2000, I was a college student at UMaine Farmington, and I took second semester off to teach skiing. And there was another instructor who told me about his time in the New Hampshire National Guard. We have a mountain infantry unit, and ski and ice climb and rock climb and snowshoe and 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, go out and shoot guns. The company had existed for 23 years. It had only been called in for ice storms and flooding in state. And so when the spring came and I found I couldn't teach ski lessons anymore, I went down to a recruiter's office and I wound up graduating from basic training in August of 2001. Found myself back at UMaine Farmington for my sophomore year when 9/11 happened. And within weeks, my unit was called in to guard airports, which I didn't do because I hadn't been trained as an infantryman yet. I'd been through basic training, but not infantry school.
Right.
So I didn't wind up going to airports for airport duty. But in 2004, I deployed to Iraq. I spent 11 months on the ground as an infantryman. Did a lot of convoy escort, route security, occasional urban operations, and during the Fallujah offensive, we were on the eastern edge of the cordon, so making sure people did not leave or enter the city of Fallujah while that offensive was happening. Came home, finished my undergraduate work and got a master's degree, and I got connected first with Dennis Kucinich's presidential campaign. This is the 2008 presidential cycle. And I started speaking and introducing Dennis Kucinich as a peace candidate, and then somebody involved with New Hampshire Peace Action noticed that there was a New Hampshire vet who was speaking for Dennis Kucinich and invited me to do some events. Wound up on the board of New Hampshire Peace Action. And then when our director at the time, Ann Miller, moved on, I stepped in and I did that work for 14 years. Being ED of New Hampshire's largest peace group was a wonderful experience. And the last 3 years or so, I have just been a dad. My wife has gone back to work, and I've taken the stay-at-home parent role and let my heart and my mind rest a bit, with kind of holding and trying to oppose U.S. foreign policy and the what I see is one of the most violent and damaging systems that humanity's ever devised, which is military Keynesianism. This model where economic growth is largely dependent on government funds being distributed for military manufacturing, which then becomes global control. You've been doing this work for a few years now, and it's exhausting. But it's still, this is the work that that defined me for my 14 years as ED of New Hampshire Peace Action, and it remains hard work, but it's so critical. So that's who I am.
Okay. For the audience, Gaza, what was happening in Gaza, what apparently looked like a genocide was happening against the Palestinians stuck there. And this was November of 24, or August of 24, and I was like, there's got to be veterans speaking out against this. Yeah. When I actually tuned in, what are we doing? What are we supporting over there? Yeah. And so I reach out to National, and somebody there put me in contact with, I don't know if Will Thomas first, but eventually got to you, and you invited me up to have a conversation. Yeah. What I was looking to do. And that's how we started. And so Veterans for Peace, the New Hampshire chapter, About Face, Veterans Against the War. Yeah. But it was confusing to me. It was Iraq Veterans Against the War, which you were
Yeah.
part of when it was under that name.
Yeah, yeah.
When did you join that? Was it after Peace Action?
It's a good question. I think my the first time I marched with Iraq Vets Against the War was a rally for the impeachment of George Bush and Dick Cheney. It would have been 2007. I think it was right after I got out of the Guard. I probably officially joined Iraq Vets Against the War and Vets for Peace. It was probably 2007 or maybe 2008.
Was that challenging? You've described, I've listened to peace action conversations in the past, challenging for Iraq veterans or veterans of Afghanistan or any U.S. war to see you in a peace, fighting for peace, to seem like you're doing an unpatriotic thing.
Sometimes that's the reaction. I've always wanted to point out to people that nobody cares more about war and peace than those who have lived it and been part of it. And when I say that, that means that in the peace movement, including peace action and civilian peace groups, veterans and family members of veterans are there are a lot more of them in the peace movement than non, right? It's people whose lives have been touched in some way. But there are also a lot of veterans for whom patriotism takes on a different, almost desperate quality. There are a lot of folks who have to believe that what they were involved with was something good, something true, something right. And threatening that worldview can really cause anger. So I've certainly had veterans shout at me or write op-eds. I've been called a disgrace for advocating for peace. Mm-hmm. But I kind of get it. I remember coming home from Iraq and how hard it was for me to accept that the war had been harmful entirely. That there were starving, barefoot, naked children who had lost their parents. That there were millions of traumatized people. That the economy had been destroyed. That nothing good had happened, and that I had been some part of something destructive, something horrible, something bigger than me. And that sense stuck with me for a long time. And I don't have I'm not challenged to see why people feel mad when they're holding on to the idea that serving and doing, being part of creating those conditions is wrong, because you have to believe that there's something good and true and right about that myth of American exceptionalism, that we're bringing democracy. And in hindsight, you look at Afghanistan. Afghanistan's certainly not better after 20 years of U.S. war making. You can look at Iraq. It's not better after 15 years of U.S. war making in Iraq. Libya, had the highest literacy, the highest, the lowest infant mortality, the highest rates of education in all of continental Africa, and all of those stats have been destroyed since we backed forces and helped create a coup in Libya. It's now the global slaving capital of the world. So we, you can look at history and see how harmful U.S. war making has been. But I think most folks who join do so from a place of wanting to serve their community, mm-hmm. of wanting to serve the ideals of democracy, of equality. That's on the mind of most people when they join. And so to serve, you've got to believe in that's what it's about. And the message that it's actually mostly about profit for a small handful of individuals, that mm-hmm. it's about pitting poor and powerless people against each other for the benefit of rich and powerful people. It's a threatening message. It shakes worldviews. So I understand why people feel like they have to shout, and it doesn't remove me from my responsibility to speak the truth anyway.
Yeah. And when you come to people that are having difficulty with what they took part in,
Yeah.
it always comes to, well, it came down, I was there for my buddy. I was fighting for them.
Yeah.
And you have to let go of the bigger picture because it was just about you surviving with your buddies.
That's right.
And that's as far as it can go, because you can't justify
Right.
what wars can be justified. I mean, what do we know from Vietnam?
Yeah.
Just Vietnam on. What do we know about these invasions? Grenada, Panama,
Yeah.
Nicaragua. I mean,
Right. Nothing ended well for us. Nothing ended well for the people we were involved with.
and all the time it's dressed up in that humanitarian language. We're doing it for democracy, for the people there, and we're doing it right now.
In Iran.
For the Iranians, for the women of Iran.
Yeah.
We're doing it for them, but we did that. We said the same
Blew up a
things
school and killed 160 women for the women of Iran, young women.
and it doesn't matter. And so you think, well, we did that, the same language for Iraq. We were bringing democracy and freedom to the Iraqis. But afterwards, who cares what their society looks like? It was justification for the war, and we buy it. Enough of us buy it.
Enough. Enough people have to. I mean, we have a lot of New Hampshire families, and we're here in Merrimack, right? Tons of New Hampshire families depend on military manufacturing as an economic way of life, and for that to thrive, you have to have a media that is complicit and a government that's complicit in putting forward a mythology around what the U.S. What U.S. military force is globally, and I think that. There was an internet meme, and it was about why sometimes folks on the left focus their vitriol on the Democratic Party, and it describes two dumpsters, and then you open one dumpster, and inside you see rats eating carcasses and rotting food. And you open it up and they say, we're rats, and we're here, and we're eating carcasses and food, and we're spreading disease, and we're gross. And you don't need to say anything about it because it's rats. But then you open a second dumpster and you look in, and it's the same scene. But they say, we're fluffy bunnies and we're here to cuddle with you. They're still rats. And, and so when we talk about the Democratic Party, I mean, I think especially right now, I think Maggie Hassan is someone who really kind of exemplifies it. As governor, she talked nonstop about needing to bring good Pentagon contracting jobs to the U.S. Her ads, Chris Pappas is the same way. Mm-hmm. Their ads talk about making good jobs, keeping America safe. This is their core message, right? We're gonna bring good jobs to New Hampshire, keeping America safe. And they go and they see part of their job as making sure that that part of this tank or that computer system on this plane that gets made in New Hampshire, that those jobs always come back. And it's thousands of jobs. It's many, many tens of thousands of jobs in New Hampshire that our elected officials, Democratic or Republican, view it as their job to bring home. And to do that, both for their own cognitive dissonance, but also to continue to be elected, they have to take part in this continuing narrative of everybody wants to attack us. Of course, the U.S. spends more than 3 times on our military than China, our next largest competitor. We have about 700-800 bases around the world outside of the U.S. We are. Nobody wants to attack the U.S. and see what happens. I think Mao famously said, if you ever tried to invade the U.S., there would be a rifle behind every blade of grass. We were not threatened by Iran. We're not threatened by Iraq or Afghanistan. There's no government out there that wants to go to war with the U.S. And we were talking before the show about maybe discussing Pete Hegseth, and it's not great to talk about an individual, but the change from the Department of Defense to the Department of War, just being clear. I think that Trump, my friend Jeremy calls him the mirror, because he shows us what Americanism is. He shows us what this. He doesn't lie. He's showing us what what America has been globally for a long time. And I think naming it the Department of War is accurate. They want to make war, I think also that it's kind of refreshing that Trump has just been open and honest, like that he doesn't like brown people, and that there's money to be made by slaughtering them. And that's the way it's always been. We just haven't talked about it as openly as this administration seems to want to.
Two points of that. One of the things that you constantly reiterate is you're fighting for the dignity of all people. We couldn't go to war and blow people apart and starve them and cause disease outbreaks and famine and destroy a state or country or a culture without dehumanizing them first.
Right.
We wouldn't accept this
Right.
to treat these people less the skin color, less the
Imagine
ethnicity.
if the 160 schoolgirls who we blew up a couple weeks ago in Tehran, and imagine if those were American girls, if we thought they were as human, if most Americans said those 160 little girls are just as human as my own little girl, my own daughter, my niece, people wouldn't feel okay about our tax dollars destroying 160 innocent lives. I'll never forget the reaction to the Sandy Hook shooting, because I was at that point, so locked into reading reports of the drone attacks that were happening, usually, on a weekly basis. But, it was just like an average Tuesday in Pakistan or Afghanistan or Uganda or Yemen or any of the many places we were dropping bombs at that point, and how upset people were that children were killed, but only really because they were white American children. Because we kill children all the time. It's kind of our MO.
There was, if people were listening to news about what was happening for wars, while Russian war was waging on, the bombing and genocide was starting in Gaza, and you wouldn't believe how, if you put them side to side, how they spoke about the poor Ukrainians, and just absent this, just these many people died, or this woman, or they just kept down, like even though it was a toddler that was killed in an attack, it was another woman was killed, or a girl, like they just kept. As much as they could dismiss it, as if they weren't worthy of having any dignity or future taken from them.
Yeah.
And it just but it was ongoing.
Right. Well, it's not to say that what Russia did is okay, but certainly we've been able to sell a lot more weapons by making humans of Ukrainians.
Yeah.
So,
it made it easy to sell it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what brings us here, this conversation, the drive, your years, your experience at Iraq, dismantling the war machine. Can we stop dehumanizing and funding these wars? Would you put it a different way?
No. That's a good way of putting the question. The facial expression was about like can we? And I think during my 14 years at Peace Action, part of your job when you're leading an organization is to constantly be instilling your members with hope. And so I'm trying to think of that not as an organizational leader, but as just a person who's been in the struggle for a couple decades. Like, can we defeat American militarism? And I have to believe we can and we will. And it's not I don't think that's Pollyanna. I think that's just recognizing that what we're seeing with Trump is a collapse of propaganda systems. And what I think the desperation with which both Democrats and Republicans in Congress tried to make sure that TikTok was no longer available once Americans started protesting the war in Gaza, and it shows that we're able to, if given the opportunity, build networks and communicate with people who the system needs us to believe are the other or are less than human. And so I have to believe that military Keynesianism is crumbling. But I also I do have a sense that maybe nationalism globally is going through some challenges that I think in a lot of places humans are refusing to separate themselves based on where they were born. And I think that is something that will continue to happen. One of the things the internet has done is brought us closer as human beings. So I think so. And John Lamperti was one of my board members at New Hampshire Peace Action for many, many years, and he passed away last year. But John used to say he wasn't here because he thought he could stop the bastards. He just didn't want to let the bastards get away with it. Yeah. And that still resonates with me. That just like, I'm just not going to let them get away with it. Like I can't just sit here silent while people are lied to and while people die because of those lies. It's change never happens as fast as we want it to. But I do think as a species, we're in an evolutionary period. Things are changing really rapidly, and the chaos and violence we see, and I do see Trump as a manifestation of that kind of, that things are changing really quickly, and there's a violent response to that, and I think that's we see that resistance in there's the I don't know, incel movement and this like hyper masculine movement.
The manosphere thing.
Yeah. I think what we're seeing is just a violent pushback on a society that's actually evolving. I think we are, and I don't spend a ton of time with children. It's not like I'm a teacher, but I have 2 kids of my own. Mm-hmm. And I can't believe that their generation would let things continue as they are.
No. I can't see it either.
Yeah. So that means, means probably we're going to do well. And we're going to get through this. We're going to change the way we operate as a species. It's going to take time. And I also want to say that there are incremental wins. There are in the peace movement. There are chances for us to look at what we've done and say, "Holy crap, we saved a lot of lives." My favorite recent example is Yemen, and very few people paid a ton of attention to Yemen, but there's a man named Hassan Al-Tayyab who is a lobbyist with the Friends Committee on National Legislation, and he worked actually with a number of different organizations during the period when the Saudi war in Yemen was really hot, and we had hundreds of thousands of people dying of starvation, preventable diseases, not to mention thousands being killed by bombing, and that he was able to, over a number of years, make relationships with folks in Congress, and he never. Every year, they would put forward a bill that would cut off U.S. support for the Saudi-led offensive in Yemen, and stop giving certain weapons to Saudi Arabia and UAE so that they couldn't continue to do those wars. And there were things like F-15 tires, which you can only get from the U.S., and every time an F-15 takes off, it needs a new set of tires. So if you can shut off the flow of F-15 tires, you shut off the Saudis' ability to fly their F-15s. He never managed to push that bill through. But what he did is he got a bigger and bigger group on board with that bill until it was like 17 votes away from actually passing. And at that point, Saudi Arabia was so nervous about losing U.S. intelligence support, air refueling support, U.S. munitions and arms, that Saudi Arabia went to China and asked them to help broker a ceasefire, and that ceasefire held. So that work, and I name Hassan al-Tayyab because it was a strategy that he championed, and that he probably went through more than 200 congressional meetings, usually bringing Yemeni American constituents, veterans who were constituents, that he, for years, just organized meetings with Congress people to convince them that giving weapons to Saudi Arabia and UAE for the offensive in Yemen was wrong. And he didn't convince enough to win, but he convinced enough to shake Saudi Arabia and end the war. And that on its own saved, I have to give Hassan al-Tayyab and he wasn't alone. We had Hassan at New Hampshire Peace Action. There were Vets for Peace chapters all over the country engaged in this struggle. There were Peace Action chapters all over the country, and American Friends Service Committee. It was a big struggle, but he kind of led that strategy. And I have to say that, I credit Hassan with he's saved at least 100,000 lives on his own. And that, so he didn't change the system. He didn't even change legislation, but his work made a huge contribution to keeping innocent people alive. And so that there are, it kind of goes back to John Lamperti. You don't have to win, but it doesn't excuse you from your responsibility to fight the bastards.
To that point, that's the same conversation about people that enjoyed the new administration's attack on welfare or SNAP benefits or school funding or jobs. You're like, I don't want my tax dollars going to this. Well, for Yemen, do you want your tax dollars going to supporting the Saudi campaign against Yemenis, where they're just blowing people from the sky, where their fighter planes and bombers are just targeting civilians or places where people gather, just slaughtering because these people do not have value? And it was fine. Right. It was fine for our government to support this. Yeah. And this is our government, our politicians. It just, it keeps the money flowing. Yeah. And so these people don't have value where it was to the American public. It's without the work of you and many others to put pressure on legislature to threaten that, the Saudis this might politically backfire and have to, we might have to face consequences for this.
Yeah. The win doesn't always happen the way you think it's going to happen, but sometimes we have these victories and I think we failed to take a moment and after that happened and say, hey, peace movement was instrumental in saving in ending a war and saving a massive number of lives here, and that's makes it worth it. What we do is worth it. That work matters. And it's not because we destroyed military Keynesianism or shook a system where the only people who can be taken seriously for political office are people who have already convinced enough of the folks with wealth and power in the political system to create a campaign for them, right? So you can't get somebody who accurately represents people who aren't wealthy, because you can't ever be taken seriously for office if you don't already have money from the insurance lobby, from the weapons manufacturers, from whatever the industries are in your district. You can't make it to Congress unless you've convinced those industries you're okay. And so we haven't had huge victories in campaign finance. It doesn't mean that there haven't been victories for justice. So we can accept we have a broken system and commit to fighting it, but then we also have to fight within that broken system to try to save the lives we can.
And for folks that may be feeling that there's unpatriotic things being said, to question this, there's a difference between the government and the state. It's upholding our Constitution. It's what we swore an oath to. It's the Constitution that many people admire and envy and wish they would have in their own countries. Many people have looked this up. Adversaries of the U.S. have looked up to this. But it's the people in charge, it's the government, it's individuals that are allowing this, are doing essentially corrupt thing. I mean, it is blatant corruption. I mean, war profiteering is not even illegal anymore. Or I don't think it is, but
no, it's not. Yeah,
insider trading's not illegal.
No, there's a I mean, it's frequently there's you go from being a high-ranking general or admiral straight onto the board of a Pentagon contractor. This is very common, and so you wind up having people selling weapons to the officers who they promoted. Right, like you have a 4-star general, and they're selling to a former 4-star general, a 3-star general, selling to a 2-star general when they gave them their promotion to lieutenant colonel, and brigadier general. That those were, this is the person who was in charge of you, and now they're selling you weapons. You've got truly enormous amounts of money for the CEOs and shareholders of those companies, but also you have dignified employment for thousands of people. So it's a really, really well entrenched system, and one that we're not, we haven't managed to change it yet, but that we will change. That isn't stable. And that we maybe can help collapse.
I think the statistic was the last 28 of 32 4-stars have gone on right into a weapons manufacturer who was previously agreeing and accepting those weapon packages for whatever their job was.
Yeah.
How is that not a revolving door?
Oh, it is, and that's the point, right? Like we swore an oath to the same Constitution. I do think one of the beauties of our Constitution is that it knew it was a document of its time. It knew that it would need to be edited, and it knew that at some point it would need to be rewritten. And clearly, at this point, I think the Constitution has been something that we can. The government doesn't care what it says. The government's not following the Constitution, and I think of international treaties and our Article 2, the second sentence in Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution says that any treaty we ratify becomes supreme law of the land. But we are, we don't honor our treaties. The UN Charter is a ratified treaty, so it should be part of it. We don't, we attacked Kosovo under Bill Clinton. We attacked Iraq and Afghanistan under George W. Bush. We attacked Libya under Barack Obama. We've attacked Iran under Donald Trump. We clearly don't care that the United Nations Charter says you can only attack someone if they've attacked you first. We attack who we want, and we don't mind what our Constitution says about war powers. We don't mind what it says about following international treaties. We do what we want, and the reality is that that the law doesn't matter. So I think that we can. It's not. I don't think it's anti-patriotic to. And that being said, patriotism is not a value that at this stage in my life I consider important, because I put it next to nationalism. I love humanity. I think that innocent children should be protected. I don't care if they were born in Merrimack or Belmont or Concord or Tehran. An innocent child should be protected. And I don't put nationalism of any kind or patriotism as a thing. I do agree with a lot of the ideals that I think America is supposed to stand for, but we're at a point where I think we need to recognize that whatever the Constitution did well early on, it's not doing that well right now. And that the system that we have is broken enough that we maybe should look at Article 5 of our Constitution, which tells us how to start over and say, okay, this document is no longer as useful as it was. How do we set up a government in a way that works for the American people? And I think getting money in politics under control at this point, given Supreme Court decisions over the last few decades, is going to be really hard to do with the Constitution we have. So I do think an Article 5 convention might be something we need to consider in the next decade or so. But we're in a time of really chaotic change, and I'm not trying to predict where things are heading because I don't know.
To your point about throwing out international law, we ratified the UN Charter. It's in our Constitution. I forget which article it's under. But it's something we agreed upon because how else were you going to hold Nazi Germany to account?
Right.
Because Germany wasn't breaking any of their own laws.
Right.
We needed some international system. There were other things, but something that actually held them for war crimes. And we created the UN. We ratified it. We're supposed to uphold those, but we don't, and we don't we're not signatories to certain things because we can't have veto power in it.
Yeah.
So like, why else would Congress pass a law that we have the right to invade The Hague to free Americans after we invade Iraq? Because we can't, so the ICC can't hold anybody here, any soldier, any politician accountable. During the genocide in Gaza for all the funding against all the Leahy laws and all the state laws were violating.
Yeah. Gaza is a great example of like this is constitutionally and legally, there's no way when the UN has said this is a genocide, which they have.
Yeah.
When the ICC has said this is a genocide, our laws are very, very clear. We do not send weapons into that situation. We are breaking the law and violating our own constitution, and have been since Biden was in office by supporting Israel in their Gaza offensive. And is that over? I think is a debatable topic, but our complicity is clearly illegal.
Clearly,
yeah.
And and politicians nervous because the ICC could come after. This is the International Criminal Court.
Yeah.
Could go after them. This
But
is
domestic law too. Like there's no the Leahy law is and so many other laws that and Vets for Peace had a wonderful letter that laid out the legal arguments for why we couldn't continue to support Israel. And I don't know if they're still circulating that. But.
Oh, I'd have to find out. I'm going to quote Chris Hedges.
All right.
We now live in a nation where doctors destroy health, lawyers destroy justice, universities destroy knowledge, governments destroy freedom, the press destroys information, religion destroys morals, and our banks destroy the economy. I think he wrote that in the early 2000s, probably under George W. Bush. You see, the ridiculousness of what you see, but it was there under Biden. If you were paying attention, it was there under the first Trump administration. It was there under Obama, for particularly the drone warfare program and what was happening. The Wall Street, the bailouts, where that money went, affordable, the Obamacare, who did that money go to?
Hedges is always fascinating, and I'm just gonna use the opportunity to say I was in the cell next to Chris Hedges at an event that Veterans for Peace did in 2012 in response to the second surge in Afghanistan. There were 131 of us arrested, and Hedges was in the next cell over, but. I did also once give a kind of a counter speech because Chris Hedges was so hopeless. At one point, his whole talk was like, well, we're headed to a place where poor people don't have food or basic services or medical care, and wealthy people live in walled compounds, and it's just going to be Mad Max. So good luck. And I had to try to give some hope, but his writing is brilliant. Luckily, some of his predictions were a little pessimistic. I had something that I should have mentioned to you before we started. A question that I'm wondering if anyone you've met in the peace movement understands what's going on. And NPR helped me a little, but this is in reference to Iran. And specifically, so China has issued a few statements after we attacked Iran. They were what I would consider calm, measured.
Yeah.
They were saying the U.S. shouldn't be doing this. This is wrong. But they weren't frantic or provocative, and I can't for the life of me, because I consider myself someone, even after leaving peace action, somebody who understands most of foreign policy, how China can be so calm. My understanding is that about 2/3 of their oil comes through the Strait of Hormuz, and part of why, for China, Iran needed to remain independent from the U.S. empire was because if you can shut off the Strait of Hormuz from both sides, you can cripple China. And I do know that part of, and I said NPR had helped me a little bit, because NPR reported that basically in the 2 weeks before we attacked Iran, China managed to pull about 3 months worth of oil through the strait in kind of a rapid pull. But to me, that's still not a guarantee that they're going to be able to control that the straits stay open. And that seems to be I don't understand how they can be calm, because much like having, so in the case of Ukraine and Russia, there are no mountain ranges or natural geographic barriers between Kyiv and Moscow, right? Once you get past the Ural Mountains, you can drive tanks across what is essentially open plains, fields, straight to Moscow from Kyiv, and you can move an army through, and there are no real choke points. And so there was an understanding that if Ukraine was seen as a threat by Russia, they might eventually invade. Similarly, China can't let the U.S. control both sides of the Strait of Hormuz, and I can't for the life of me understand why they're so calm. The little
bit that I do listen to, it's not closed, but it's like a checkpoint. That there are ships that are still getting out. Which ships, I'm not sure. It is down significantly, and China did pull. They have like 90 days of reserves for their economy before they get into trouble. I assume they know something that the general public doesn't know. The back talks. They're going to get They're going to get their energy from somewhere to continue.
It's a fascinating question, because I do consider China's foreign policy team. It's very different than U.S. politics, where depending on who wins the election, the foreign policy team is going to get totally swapped out. So China has, their foreign policy is very consistent, and it's the same people over a long time, extremely experienced, generally extremely good, and we can see that in how they have been influential in negotiating peace treaties over the last 5 or 6 years. Not just Yemen and Saudi Arabia, but that they have played that kind of role. And I have to, I think you're right that they have to know something we don't. And I wish I understood that piece right now, because it's something that's happening in foreign policy that I don't get. Why is China calm right now? Because it is, for me, it's about if the U.S. controls both sides of the strait. If we get a base on the Iran side of the strait, it's about great power competition, which I think, we can see that in Ukraine. It's not, some of it's about the food in Ukraine, some of it's about the pipelines that are scheduled to go across Ukraine, but there's an element of proxy war, and I think most of the time, great powers have opinions on when one of the great powers moves into that kind of area and are engaged either covertly or overtly in supporting the opposition. And it's baffling to me right now why China is calm, because this is the U.S. and Israeli invasion of Iran, if it results in a U.S. base on that side of the strait, is a security, what I would think would be a security red line for China.
At minimum, maybe they think they can weather it. But they're confident that the non-frantic statements that they're making seems that they're confident of something. I don't have any more than that.
Yeah, it may just be confidence in Iran's strategy, which it's funny because we've been threatening war with Iran since 2004, and in 2004, Iran began training their military in asymmetric warfare, how to steam out high explosive from artillery rounds, how to make shape charges. The plan has always been for Iran, if the U.S. attacks, make it as expensive as you can, and they've been doing that quite well with using cheap drones and making Israel and the U.S. use multi-million-dollar interceptors to stop them. They've been making it expensive, and that's clearly a strategy that will continue to be effective for Iran. And maybe it's just that China has that much faith that within a few months the U.S. will give up because it'll be too expensive. Which that would be a lot of faith in Iran. I don't know that I'm there, but maybe China is.
30% of fertilizer goes through that strait. 27% of all oil goes through that strait. Yeah. It has to. I mean, the fallout. What I hear is the fallout in the international community for what the U.S. is doing. Eyes are on the U.S.'s behavior in this. I imagine they think they're going to weather this, whether that's well thought out. I imagine they're forward thinking. They think way out in the future.
Yeah, right. China's whole system works differently because they're focused on long term, and there's got to be a plan for the lack of panic. But
whereas our administration is getting rich quickly not to our benefit by any means. Yeah. They are. If you look at their net worth, it is exploding. Yeah. And I do want to switch to Iran. We have a little bit of time left.
Yeah.
And I'm going to use a comparison for Vietnam. But to start it, to break the... I have here never been seen before, Exhibit A, the prophecy. This is an ancient cuneiform tablet. I took a photocopy of it. And this is 3,500 years old. And if you read that, you may not be able to read this, but it says here, Iran will have a nuclear weapon within the next 2 months. Never before seen is the nuclear weapon prophecy.
It certainly has been the message since 2004 that Iran is right on the verge of having a nuclear weapon. Any second now, they're gonna drop it on DC, which is ridiculous. Iran's the Ayatollah, who's now dead, issued a fatwa, which means you get beheaded against nuclear weapons. If you try to develop a nuclear weapon in Iran, you get beheaded for that. It is a religious law that was firm.
And our intelligence has, since 2003, assessed that they are not making a nuclear weapon.
That's right.
Last year, when we did the attacks in June last year, again, intelligence said they are not making a nuclear weapon.
Right.
Again, this time, and now President saying it's Witkoff is telling him that, and Hegseth and Rubio are telling him that, and Gabbard's out there disgracing herself. Then the immediacy is up for the president to determine for his war powers making. Right. You could have bought her shirt in the 2020 campaign for president. No war with Iran. Right. I had to go back on. I was like, do I still buy it from her campaign?
Yeah. And what a strange world we live in. I've twice had lunch with Tulsi Gabbard when she was a pro-peace progressive Democrat.
When she was taken off by Hillary, the DNC. She was ousted for her role with not defending Assad, but defending lies that the U.S. government or our U.S. foreign policy establishment was making about what Assad had.
Right.
Yeah. This is Syria. This is for that they're making weapons of mass destruction.
I hugged Tulsi Gabbard, and there was a really interesting Mike Preisner, who recently took over as executive director of the Center on War and Conscience. Mike wrote a really interesting article about how Tulsi Gabbard has always been like that. She's changed a lot of her positions. She's changed her political party. There have been, but that she's always supported peace. That's been her core. That she has been anti-war. She's been opposed to the war machine, and that really sticking with the Trump administration right now, there's no way to say you're a peace person. And And that being said, I also, I sometimes imagine that Tulsi Gabbard is the woman who I had lunch with. That she is kind, that she is caring, that she does want to keep the U.S. out of unnecessary wars. And I imagine that she's just trying to hold herself in that position because she knows she can help a little bit if she's in a position of power. But I think that the yesterday's resignation, if she's not with him, then she's lost. She's not who she's pretended to be.
This is Joe Kent, her I don't know what his position was for intelligence.
I think director of the Center for Counterintelligence.
A real MAGA enthusiast.
Absolutely, yeah.
Fanatic.
Stepped down because of Iran.
But she won't. But she's quite focused on her career, and it's like
Yeah. Right, yeah, no, I don't think she is who she was pretending to be. Or maybe she's just changed that much. It's funny, anybody who was involved in any sort of LGBT organizing thought, even though she was saying good things at that point, was like, no, she's lying. She is not real. She did not have a trust, and were kind of grossed out that I thought she was okay. And that being said, I endorsed Sanders that cycle because I thought he was the best chance progressives had at the White House. And voted for Sanders in that election. But I really liked Tulsi Gabbard because she was talking about peace. She was bringing it forward, and a lot of people were like, she's not real. And I think at this point, if Joe Kent has stepped down because of Iran and she's still part of the administration, it's hard to accept that she might be a decent person. I was probably pretty wrong about Tulsi Gabbard.
Same. And so I hear that I forget the size of the Marines that are being assembled, supposedly going to Central Command. You imagine there's some talk about Carg Island, whether that will manufacture. But the point I want to make is that in Vietnam, our first ground troops, 3,500 Marines from the 9th Marine Expeditionary Brigade, on March 8th, 1965, were the first units to be there for combat duty. But as our news portrayed at the time, this is from the New York Times on March 9th, United States Marines landed today at Da Nang to defend the strategic airbase there against possible Viet Cong attack. And if you were like, oh, the news is lying, let's listen to the administration. LBJ said, the Marines have been sent to Da Nang to protect the air bases there. They are not intended for offensive operations against the Viet Cong. Secretary of Defense McNamara, the Marines are there for the protection of the Da Nang and air bases and associated installations. Their mission is to protect the air base of Da Nang. They are not intended for offensive operations. This is 1965. Mm-hmm. The only one I found for news to question this was the Washington Post on the 9th, same day. The landing of U.S. Marines marks a new stage in the war in Vietnam and raises questions of how far the United States will go in committing ground forces. Now, we didn't pull out until 1973. The Pentagon papers were first published, I think, in 69. But 71, Mike Gravel stood up there, Daniel Ellsberg. And that, how many fabrications, the lies. We have, before ground troops were, I printed this out in the New York Herald on March 3rd, 160 jets blast North Vietnam targets. They were just highlighting all the confusing what is tactics with strategy, just blowing, because you could sell weapons packages that blow up, go boom, and it looks fantastic, right? With all the, wow, look at all that power. But it doesn't win you the war because they blasted apparently every square inch 3 times over after all is said and done in Vietnam, and still strategically lose the war militarily.
Yep.
But that was what lessons were learned from Vietnam or Iraq or Afghanistan. We just had the Afghanistan papers come out in 2019, right? Was it 2019?
I'm not sure.
All the interviews for the failures of what we're doing, how, and the summation from the Afghanistan, this is interviewing 400 state and defense officials related to what was going on in Afghanistan from 2001 to 21. Is that U.S. military officials and advisors described explicit and sustained efforts to deliberately mislead the public. We were constantly lied to the entire time of the progress. And of the $2 trillion that was spent there, it was discovered upwards of 29 billion went into pockets of corrupt officials, Taliban, this is weapon systems, just money. And where's all that? Where's the lesson learned? John Sopko sorry, go on.
The lesson is the U.S. government does not care as long as the money keeps flowing, as long as weapons contractors are getting rich, as long as Congress people can bring home good jobs, keeping America safe and keep that narrative alive. It's not about making the world better or winning the war. It's about making money and maintaining political power in our system. I think that the reason we're not seeing them do things differently is because things went just fine. For if you were KBR Halliburton, the Iraq War was great. Like you happened to have a whole bunch of money invested in Mobil. You did really well with the Iraq War.
That is it for time. Will, I have to thank you for coming on.
Of course, Jesse.
And thank you for tuning in. Find us at New Hampshire Veterans for Peace.